This is the Jazz Rocks podcast, where the past, present, and future of jazz fusion lives. Here are musician and radio personality Tom Alexander and author and musicologist Walter Kolosky.
Hey everyone, welcome back. It is the Jazz Rocks podcast, and this is episode number 10. My name is Tom Alexander, and of course, Walter Kolosky on the other side. Hey Walter, how's it going?
It's going great. I'm ready for number 10. Who knew?
Yeah, who knew? Hey, we made it to number 10. That's great. And we're going to try something new today. And why don't you tell the folks what we're doing?
Well, we're going to talk about our topic for our first segment today is the most surprising jazz rock or fusion show we ever attended.
Yeah.
Actually, this can only be one we can only do this one time. We can't do it more than once.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. By nature, it's very title, right? So
right. So I'll get right into it, and because mine is a strong memory. Back in 1988, in fact, December, because I looked it up on the internet, December of 1988, I was living in Canoga Park, California. I had a house out there. I had a spare room in that house, and I was renting it out to a guy named Tony. And by chance, and this is rare, he was a jazz fusion fan.
Yeah.
Who knew that would be the tenet, but it ended up that way. And he bought 2 tickets to go see the comeback concert of the guitarist Larry Carlton at the Universal Amphitheater in Los Angeles. His plan was to bring a date, but that didn't work out. So at the very last minute, he asked me if I want to go see Larry Carlton's comeback concert. The reason this was a big deal, and by the way, this story has the preamble is longer than the story, but I have to tell the preamble.
Sure.
So I don't know if you remember this or not, but Larry Carlton was shot. He was a victim of a gunshot to his neck.
Yeah.
Circumstances are very mysterious. It had to do with a couple teenagers chasing after a dog, and the dog ended up in his garage, and the next thing you know, one of these teenagers shoots Larry Carlton in the neck, and it was a very serious injury. He would later say that he almost lost his life because of this, and he got paralysis, I believe, in his left arm and damage to his vocal cord, and so there was a lot of rehab that was necessary. You know, he was quite well known at this time, well known enough to fill the Universal Amphitheater, over 6,000 people. So also for this show, it was sort of a fundraiser for other gun shooting victims. So there were supposed to be special guests like Michael McDonald, Joni Mitchell, Christopher Cross, Michael Franks was supposed to be there. I do remember vaguely that none of those people appeared. There was some sort of contractual issue, if I remember correctly. But, you know, it was the coming back of Larry Carlton. So the fans there wasn't a lot of grumbling. You know, they were happy that Larry Carlton was going to come back, even if he was only at 80%, which he had said in the articles. So, you know, he says, I don't know really what to expect. This is my first show after all the rehab and after everything I've been through, and he's very emotional, and a lot of fans were going to be emotional, but he sort of indicated ahead of time, musically, he wasn't going to be at full strength. So none of those guest stars appeared. However, there was an opening act, and this was guitar player Stanley Jordan. This was the time when he was first starting to appear on the scene in the late 80s. He had been on Johnny Carson's show, on The Tonight Show.
Yeah.
Playing in that style that he plays, that tapping style, you know, playing with a pick or fingers with the right hand, with the left up on the neck. We're all used to that now. We know what it was. We know what it is, and we know Stanley all these years. Back then, however, it was amazing to see that. It was amazing. And he would go on TV shows and play these beautiful ballads.
Yes.
Most notably, Somewhere Over the Rainbow. It would make you want to cry. I mean, first you're looking at just this technique, and of course, his performance itself was fantastic. So he was the opening act. I expected a whole bunch of beautiful ballads with this tapping technique. What he had out on stage was a guitar, not a guitar stand, but a rigged up stand like Pat Metheny. You've seen him use where there's a guitar. I think I've seen Steve Howe do this too, where he puts the guitar on a stand.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on a stand so that he can play two guitars at once.
Right.
And this is what he had set up. So he's playing a few pieces, and geez, this is nice, a few ballads. And, getting a warm reception. Then he plays, if I remember correctly, he played a Coltrane piece. I go, hey, now we're starting to get into this. Then he announced he's going to start playing his own compositions. And then, man, he went ballistic. I mean, it was jazz rock fusion at the highest level. I totally didn't expect it at all.
Yeah.
I'm sitting there and I'm going, wow, this guy's unbelievable. And the crowd was going nuts because he was going nuts. I mean, this was virtuosic, but at the same time, it was pure, what I would call fusion or jazz rock. That crowd enabled him to steal the show. The emotions felt in the crowd and by Larry made it a worthwhile event. You can't, Larry Carlton was not at full strength, quote unquote, but Larry's performance was so courageous that you were just glad that you were there.
Yeah.
There was no element of feeling that he had been blown off the stage or anything like that by Stanley Jordan. But what I always will remember is this fusion explosion from Stanley. And that was really my surprising jazz rock - fusion moment.
I remember all those appearances by Stanley Jordan on The Tonight Show. And, of course, everyone was just blown away by, the technique. And he just came across as this very warm, friendly guy. And he just was instantly likable. And so that's great, though. But I'm sure that had to come as just a real wallop. Like, wow, what's this? That's a very cool story. My surprising jazz rock fusion story dates back to the 80s, like yours, specifically April of 1986. And so there, like yours, there's a little bit of a preamble, but at the time, I was still hosting a fusion show on my college radio station, which actually had for college radio, a fairly powerful signal and had a lot of fans in the area in northeastern Pennsylvania who listened to, who liked that music. So I was sort of the de facto fusion guy on radio. So I had arranged for an interview after a few calls with the great Joe Zawinul, who had embarked on what was a solo keyboard tour, something he was trying new. This was sort of just post. I'm trying to think if it was. No, it might have also been right before actually Weather Update, in that between period between Weather Report and the Zawinul Syndicate. So anyway, he was playing at Carnegie Hall, and I go to New York, and he's staying in a hotel, and I go to interview him in the hotel. First time I'd met him, and I'm this 21-year-old kid, and he could sense that I was really nervous. But he, being a father himself, and had sons my age, he said, yeah, just relax, you'll be fine, and he was very cool with me. And I wound up, settling into the interview, and we did it. Later that night, he was playing this solo concert at Carnegie Hall, and no one really knew what to expect because we talk about courageous musicians. This was sort of courageous on his part because he really had no one to back him up. It was drum programming in its infancy in many ways, and a bank of keyboards. I think he must have been surrounded by about 8 keyboards, and it was sort of set up like a cockpit, and he's right there in the middle, looked like a spaceship almost. And man, he comes out, and first of all, I should point out that Steve Morse opened the show, and warmly received, by the way. But the anticipation was for Joe, and he walks out on stage, and who's sitting in the front row but Miles Davis and Jaco Pastorius? And I'm in about row 12 with a friend of mine. I could see Miles and Jaco, seated next to each other. I thought to myself, wow, man, some real heavyweights are here for this. And Joe walks out, and he sees the guys in the front row, and he smiles, and a little greeting to them, gets behind his keyboard rig. Well, all night long, he had technical challenges before him. It was just crazy. And, really trying to tame the technology at that point. We're talking more than 30 years ago. And he really was, initially struggling. And we could actually hear, believe it or not, which stunned me, catcalls from the Carnegie Hall audience, who probably a lot of them were season ticket holders, completely not, prepared for what this was. And so admittedly, several people left after about 2 pieces of music, which allowed us to move down closer. And let me tell you, I don't know if it kickstarted him out of just, frustration or whatever it might have been. But when there was this, I'm not going to call it mass, but it was a small exodus of season ticket holders, kind of white-haired folks. And when they left, Joe just kicked it into an entirely different gear. And I'm telling you, I was just not ready for this. It was unbelievable, shifting rhythms and expansive harmonies and burning lines. It was, two-fisted, the left hand playing these crazy bass patterns and the right hand just taking these soaring solos, and the rhythms and triggering things with his feet all at the same time. I mean, the coordination was like insane. It was an unbelievable performance. I could see Miles and Jocko, getting up and applauding, standing, and Joe just tapped off the entire energy, the sort of newfound energy of that moment. And I've never forgotten that performance in my life. It was something I was completely, I did not know going in what to expect. And when I left, my level of, I loved him, but at my level of appreciation at that point just went through the roof. I said, this guy is a monster. It was a show I've never forgotten. And believe it or not, it was actually, Walter, the last show before they remodeled Carnegie Hall. So he was sort of ushering out the classic era, and then Carnegie Hall closed for a little while for remodeling and then reopened. So it was just a really cool show, amazing, and something I'll never forget.
That's a great story. And one thing I always tell my friends is that the greatest musicians are even greater than you even know.
Yes.
They're greater than you even know. I remember as a kid, we'd want to go see a concert. We go, well, we hope they're as good as the record. But then you learn live, they're better than the record. The greatest artists, they're better than the record.
Yes.
And there's a guy, his Joe Zawinul, he's struggling. So you become part of that struggle too. You don't want you become part of that struggle, and you become part of the success over the struggle that the musician has. Yeah, I often tell people sometimes, especially when you go hear jazz players, I enjoy the struggle almost as much as I enjoy the triumph.
No question. I'll tell you, you're absolutely right. You talk about the struggle and the triumph, which is really cool in a way, because you want to see that human, dimension to your heroes.
Well, you want to, as I've told a couple of musicians after their shows when they weren't so happy with their show, you played your heart out. That's all I want.
Yeah.
So what?
Yeah.
I mean, there was some issues, but you played your heart out, and as an audience member, that's what I want you to do.
I'll tell you something. You say something, and it actually inspires me to make this little comment in it as an analogy. We're both big sports fans. We love sports. And you're a Boston guy, and even though I live in South Florida, I'm a Philly guy. Those are my teams, because that's where I was, born and raised in Pennsylvania. And there's a spirit in Philadelphia about their sports. It's not so much the losing, it's the losing and not caring. Give 110% and play with heart. And if they fail, they fail, but they played with all their heart. We want the same thing from our musicians. We want that just dirt-eating, aggressive, soulful, I'm giving it all out there. I'm putting it all out there, every ounce of me.
Yeah, I've been at concerts before.
Yeah.
In fact, a couple of years ago, I won't mention the artist, and the crowd, mostly loved him. I was there with another friend of mine, was also in attendance, and his friend was thrilled with the show and asked me what I thought, and I said, Jesus, he just wrote that one in. And I go, what are you talking about? I go, he just wrote that in. And my other friend said, you're right. You can tell. Even though a lot of people were pleased, you said, Jesus, that guy, he could have done what he had done in his sleep. He didn't put in the effort. I heard it. Maybe other people didn't. But I did, and I felt ripped off because I knew that I wasn't hearing the best. It wasn't a matter of him being ill or anything like that. I knew what he was capable of, that particular musician. And he didn't even attempt those things. I had seen him before live. He didn't even attempt those things. And I said, geez, what a disappointment. You know who's not a disappointment, though? Our special guest today. We're going to interview Leo Pavkovic, who's the founder of MoonJune Records. And I would say he and Shovik Duda of Abstract Logics are the two main business people that have kept the commercial side of this type of music alive for the past decade, at least decade, if not longer. Leo has led a very interesting life. He has a life story that's fascinating and a music story that's remarkable. And in fact, for him, his life story is a music story, which makes him one of the most compelling people I've ever met in the industry in all of these years. And that interview with Leo is coming up.
Hi, I'm Tony Levin of Stickman and Levin Brothers. You are listening to the Jazz Rocks podcast with Tom Alexander and Walter Koloski.
Manifold Recording, located just outside of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, expands the concept of studio recording to encompass the energy and audience of a live performance. Learn how Grammy-nominated engineer Ian Schreier uses full-scale rooms with 24-foot ceilings to capture real acoustic magic. Then, mixes on a 64-channel API Vision console to produce the truest representation of the music. Jazz rock stars Jimmy Herring, Wayne Krantz, Gary Husband, and Joey Calderazzo have performed and recorded at Manifold Recording. You can too. For more information, visit manifoldrecording.com or on Facebook at facebook.com/manifoldrecording. That's MANIFOLD recording.com.
Our guest today is one of the most important movers and shakers in the progressive music scene these days, Leo Pavkovic. Leo is the founder and president of MoonJune Records. The label's roster features the most talented musicians through the world over. I've known Leo for a few years and have found him to be thoroughly engaging and one of those guys whose laid-back personality gives no clue to his exhaustive work on behalf of his artists and their audiences. The Jazz Rocks podcast is honored to introduce Leo Pavkovic. And am I pronouncing your name properly?
Actually, you are very good. You're pronouncing very good. Leonardo Pavkovic. That's correct.
There you go. And Leo, meet Tom Alexander.
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm great, Leo. How you doing? Thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
Leo has a very interesting background, and we're not going to spend too much time on it because we know there's important stuff to discuss about the issues of the day. Leo's clearly a New Yorker at this point, but Leo, tell us where you came from and how your love of music first came about.
I was born in former Yugoslavia in a region that today is Bosnia and Herzegovina, but actually no one from my family is from Bosnia. That's where my grandparents ended up after the war too, and I'm of a very mixed ethnic background, Montenegrin, Croatian, Italian, Armenian, and Lebanese. And then I grew up in Italy, where my mother lived. She remarried an Italian person, a guy. Like then in 1990, I came to New York, and I live in New York City for 28 years, and I'm a New Yorker because I never lived in any other place in the world more than in New York. And in New York, it's the capital of the world. I was always kind of cosmopolitan person, and New York was probably my natural habitat, and I'm very happy that I'm here. And my life story is very complex, sometimes complicated, but that's the life. And here we are in New York City after 28 years.
Leo, when did you get your love or obtain love for music or the arts? Did that come from your family, or is it something?
Partially come from my family. I grew up with maternal grandparents. My maternal grandmother, she's Montenegrin, and she, between the two wars, War I and War II, she lived in Albania, in a border town of Scutari, bordering Montenegro. And then Albania, between the two wars, was Italian sort of colony. And she frequented all schools in Italian. And then she was also studying bel canto, opera singing. And she was very into opera music and classical music. Then when I was a little kid, I was listening all those beautiful Italian operas, Puccini, Verdi, and then also some classical music. And also my grandmother was a great fan of quality pop from 50s and 60s. And then when I was a kid, I was listening to Charles Aznavour, Leo Ferré, and Sergio Endrigo, all these kind of great things. And then, somehow, like, Haydn and Mozart, and then Yugoslavian pop music, then rock music, and naturally I became a fan, and I think she wasn't a direct influence on me, but probably was one of my biggest influences when I was 6, 7, 8 years old. And I remember we were watching TV, like, in former Yugoslavia, we had only 2 channels. And I remember, like, even in the early 70s, like when ABBA became very popular, like, ABBA, probably they were my first big heroes. Like, they won like Eurovision Festival with that famous tune Waterloo. And my mother loved that tune. And, ABBA, I was like 10, 11 years old, and ABBA became my first heroes. And, and then, of course, you get into school, you meet other guys, then they're talking about other things. Then I used to frequent Italy, where my mother lived since 1970, and meeting other friends in Italy, and other friends, they had other influences in music, and naturally and organically my taste developed in so many directions. And that's why even today, like, I cannot stick with any specific genre. I listen any music that I like, and that's the only genre that I know, the music that I like.
Leo, that's very interesting, and I don't think that's too unlike the way a lot of lovers of music and musicians sort of track along the way. They hear certain things, and it just, and then they're introduced maybe from other people to different kinds of music, and eventually it led to progressive music and fusion and different things for you. Is your label, is MoonJune, your first foray into the music business, or did you do something prior, and how did it come to be?
No, it's actually, that's a very, very long story, and it's very complex story, and I'm just finishing a very big interview for All About Jazz. Probably my biggest interview I ever did. It will be very, very extensive, where I elaborate how certain things happen. And to make it short, I started MoonJune Records by accident, trying to help friends. And then one of those friends was legendary English sax player Elton Dean, whom I knew since mid-'80s. He used to come very often to Italy. And then first time when I went to London in 1989, I stayed in his place in East London. Then when I moved to New York in 1990, I lost contact with him. Then we reconnected through mutual friends, Roswell Rudd, who died recently, and his wife, Verna Gillis, ethnomusicologist. I reconnected to Elton. And then he asked me for help, and the help was consisting me being a huge fan of early Soft Machine, especially that period, 1970 to 1972, with Robert Wyatt, Mike Ratledge, Hopper, and Elton Dean. Then I heard on internet in 1999 that there was a one-off festival gig in Germany of a project called The Software. And then when I saw, I was part of Yahoo News group, What's Rattling, which is about Canterbury music and British jazz. And then the band consisted in Elton Dean, Keith Tippett on piano, Hugh Hopper on electric bass, and John Marshall. And I say, wow, that's sort of Soft Machine. It's not really, but kind of. And then I was curious to know about it. And then Roswell Rudd was coming to my office to take some pictures. I used to run a graphic company, and I said, Ros, can you put me in touch with Elton? And then I get in touch with Elton in late December, actually on January 1st of 2000. And then we reconnected. And then a few years later, that's another long story. I was involved with sort of Sock Machine reunion. Because I had 3 members of the band. Kit Tippett wasn't really interested because he wanted to play as kind of occasionally. And then I met in California a guy who actually said, I have a right guy for you, and he's the greatest guitar player who ever walked this planet. I said, you are introducing me to Ala Holsworth. He said, yes. And then when I already kind of was fantasizing about that kind of Sock Machine sort of reunion, even before I met Alan, me and Elton and Hugh Hopper, we were kind of discussing this for about 1 year. Elton gave me a tape, a live recording that he had with Mark Hewins, English MIDI guitar player who actually briefly played also in Gong, David Allen's Gong. And then he said, maybe you can help me with this recording in USA. And I said, okay, let me help you. And then I tried to find him a label, but nobody was interested. Then that's how I started a label. I said, okay, I will help my friend. In meantime, I was involved in a New York-based label called Jazz Magnet Records, I co-founded in 1999 with a very good friend of mine, legendary jazz publicist Jim Igo. I know Jim since I came to New York. I learned many things from him, and then we started this label. We only had 7 releases, but we had a very ambitious release plan to reissue Italian jazz label Horror Records, the 70s and early 80s jazz label. And we met the owner, Aldo Sinesio, many times. We had big plans. We had investors. And somehow both Aldo Sinesio decided not to do it. And then our investors, they couldn't wait anymore. And we were stuck with 7 releases. And we kind of ran out of cash. Also because we were doing other things. I was involved in a graphic company. Then suddenly I had this recording of Elton Dean with Mark Hewins, and then I met a couple of young Italian progressive rock bands, DFA and Finisterre. And then I say, okay, let me start a label, because doing graphics in New York City for virtually who is who in the music industry in New York, I kind of learned about music business through providing graphic services. I did graphic services for which so many record labels and promoters in New York City. And then I knew how to do it. And then I just started a label. And I actually even didn't have a distribution. I didn't have a lawyer. I didn't have a publishing. I didn't have anything. I just say, okay, I need to help a couple of young bands, and I have to help my old friend Elton Dean. And I even didn't know why I did it. It just happened.
So Leo, I had back in the days when I was in the business world, I had a boss, and his philosophy or his motto was sort of, I want to do business with my friends. Is that how you operate, MoonJune? Is that how you decide who's? Yeah,
absolutely. There is one thing. I have to say something in Italian. Italian is my second native language after Serbian and Croatian. One interviewer in Italy called me say that MoonJune is, in Italian, the record label is called Casa Discografica, a record label. But he told me that MoonJune is Casa Amicografica. Amico means friend. He invented a kind of new terminology to define what is about my label. It's Casa Discografica, a record label, but it's kind of amicografica, it's a label of friends. And that's how I operate, except a couple of people that were really on my label, they're kind of nice people, but they are really not friends, kind of close friends. Literally in the last 10 years, everybody on my label, absolutely everybody, is my friend. And I don't sign artists. There is no such thing like you send me demo, I take a consideration. I don't do that. Things happen by magic. Yes, a couple of bands send me their sort of demos, but they didn't send me demos because I wanted them to send me demos to be considered. It just, it happens, or I discover certain musicians, I like them, and I don't think of working with them, but somehow we become friends. I love their music, and some magic happens, like in case of Mark Wingfield, that I know for 10 years, but we started collaborating only the last 5 years. And for me, it's very important, this kind of dimension, to have a very good relationship with the people, to be my friends, and to understand what is about music industry today, which is, it's not like used to be before. And I'm really kind of not a real label. I'm different. I even don't know how to describe what I'm doing. And actually, that's not my main thing that I'm doing in my life. I do other things for a living, as you know, like I do bookings of most of my artists on my booking roster are not on my label. But I will focus on my friends because they need my help. I need their music. It's mutually good for everybody.
This is Walter Kolosky, co-host of the Jazz Rocks podcast. It's hard to believe it's been over 10 years since I wrote Power, Passion, and Beauty, the story of the legendary Mahavishnu Orchestra. And now I have released a companion to that work, the Mahavishnu Orchestra picture book. I'm one of those people just as fascinated by the visual power of Mahavishnu as by its majestic music. I present over 70 never-before-seen inspiring images of the band, along with the stories behind the pictures and guest commentary from the Mahavishnu Orchestra, Steve Lukather, Neil Schoen, Chick Corea, John Anderson, Todd Rundgren, and many, many others. The Mahavishnu Orchestra picture book, available at iTunes and Amazon.com.
This is Mark Wingfield, saluting you from England. You're listening to the Jazz Rocks podcast with Tom Alexander and Walter Kolosky.
Leo, so in the process of choosing the music, I mean, you sort of alluded to this a little bit. Is there a certain sound, a vibe of music that, or are you just sort of, do you know it when you hear it? How does that work for you?
Even though I might know the answer, I really don't know the answer because I don't operate in that way. I am a very intuitive kind of person, and it all comes by a certain kind of magic that cannot be explained. Because I'm of a very mixed ethnic background, then living on different continents. I also lived briefly in Africa. I'm kind of consider myself kind of a global person, and I don't like to be confined into any kind of genres or groups of people or thinkers of or whatever. That's why my label, it's a music that sometimes people can characterize as jazz, as progressive, as fusion. It simply happens by some magic that it cannot be explained. And I'm especially my last 25 to 30 releases, I see there is a pattern in working with this kind of music that cannot be fit into any kind of category. That's why I categorize my label as progressive music, expanding and exploring and expanding boundaries of jazz, rock, avant, ethno, and the unknown. That the unknown factor is what is most important for me. In the last 20 years, or 15 years maybe, I'm more into instrumental music. To me, I believe that instrumental music, it's one of the art forms that allows you total freedom of expression. You don't have to explain anything with words.
Right.
Because sometimes you try to explain things with words and you can be very much misinterpreted. Playing instrumental music, then people, yes, can interpret those things, but it's just kind of a different kind of interpretation and feelings than listening, paying attention to music that has lyrics. And I jokingly tell to people, I have only few albums that with singers. People say, "Oh, why you are not making releasing albums that have lyrics?" And singers say, "Look, in today's economy, it's very expensive to print booklets with lyrics. It's." And then I like music without borders. To me, it's natural habitat. I know that in today's age, in today's world, people like to be artificially confined by themselves or by others in certain group of people. I don't like. As soon as people tell me I'm fusion label, I just go away. People tell me I'm progressive rock label, I go away. People tell me about jazz They ask me, do you like jazz? Say, I don't know. Say, how do you know? Like, you have like 10,000 albums to jazz. Say, I don't know. Like, because what jazz means is too generic to me. It's like saying, like, do you like human beings? Yes, but what kind of human beings? I like to be more specific, and that specificity is kind of more related to particular albums, and it's a great way of communicating with other people. To me, it's a language of humanity.
So, Tom, in that world traveling that Leo does, he's become a world-class foodie. He loves to go to he goes to countries to eat favorite dishes there. So, Leo, what is the next meal you're looking forward to?
Yeah, I'm actually foodie. Like, being in New York City, where you have like 250 ethnicities from the world, and especially in the neighborhoods of Queens and Brooklyn. There is, I love to explore food, and then also when I'm traveling, I have friends in every country when I go, and then I like to go where the local people go, and then I like to explore new things, and I'm not afraid of any food. I ate in my life anything that can be eatable, because if people, this is my theory, if people in distant part of the world eat certain things which other people in opposite part of the world do not eat, everybody eats what their habitat offers them to eat, like conditions and climate and whatever. But I like to explore. Like, I'm looking very much forward to this August and September tour with Stickman, 5 weeks all around South America, and then a couple of places that I'm going for the first time, like Peru and Guatemala, and I'm just looking for, even though I know food of those countries, eating here in USA or in Spain, but I'm just looking forward to eat some of that food. Like, I like local food. That's one of my favorite things in the world besides the music.
Travel is definitely inspiring, and I, as a fellow foodie, I always love to go to New York, because I know, like you said, there's just so many choices of every flag across the world. You're going to be able to find something.
Let me know, and we can go to some obscure places in Queens or Brooklyn.
Wonderful. I'm on board. Are there some tours and projects we should be keeping our eyes and ears out for coming up?
I have a couple of tours going on right now. I'm working with my good friend Steve Ham. He's not on my label, but I'm his new booking agent, and he is doing a bass solo tour all around USA. He started in St. Paul, Minnesota on the 27th of February. He's ending the tour in Toronto on March 24th. And that's one of the tours I'm doing. Like, then I'm just finalizing August and September tour of Stickman, 4.5 weeks in all across Latin America, in Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, Peru, Chile, Bolivia, Colombia, El Salvador, Panama, Guatemala, and Mexico. It's very exciting, and I will be with them traveling. And I have also a Swap Machine World Tour, which will be announced in a couple of weeks. We have a new album, which will be not on MoonJune, but it's my production. We recorded the album in London in December, and that will be released on English label Cherry Red Records. I don't have so much time to work on certain albums because it requires time. I travel a lot, but we have a USA tour in October. Then we have a big festival in Canada. Then South American tour, Japan. In Japan will be special guest Gary Husband on keyboards. And then I have many other bands like Levin Brothers. I'm planning some tours, and that's booking thing. And I have many other offshoots. I'm going to Japan with legendary Italian prog band Le Orme. I have a tour in China of Uruguayan multi-instrumentalist, predominantly guitar player based in New York, Beledo, with Dwiki Dermawan from Indonesia. It's a sort of interesting project tour in China and Indonesia. I have a couple of very interesting releases, and this year will be a year of three amazing guys, three great friends. One drummer called, Walter, you know him, Asaf Sirkis.
Yes.
This year I will have 4 albums featuring Asaf Sirkis. It will be his solo album with his girlfriend Silvia Bialash, which is International IQ Quartet. And then Asaf will be on 2 albums of Dwiki Dermawan, One is kind of album with Nguyen Lee. Actually, one is with Nguyen Lee on guitar.
Right.
Aaron Stavi and Carles Benevento on bass, like two bass players, and Asaf. Then plus a lot of Indonesian ethnic musicians. Then there is one improvisational album of Dwiki, also with Asaf, with Italian singer, experimental singer Boris Savoldelli, and with Marcus Reuter from Stickman. And then I will have an album that, for me, it's extremely important because I consider this guy one of the greatest guitar players ever. And that's my opinion, and I'm a very opinionated guy sometimes, especially when I talk about friends. That's Mark Wingfield. And his new album with Jaron Stavi on a fretless bass guitar and Asaf Sikis is beyond amazing. It's something absolutely amazing. Plus, I will have a new album of a very good friend of mine, my countryman, Serbian, even though I'm not Serbian, he's from former Yugoslavia, Vasil Hadžimanov, a great, amazing pianist and keyboard player. And I'm very excited. And I cannot release so many albums, as I mentioned before, because I travel a lot. And then releasing albums, it requires some time and dedication. And I like to be dedicated to whatever I do.
I can tell that. That's some list, by the way. Yeah, I can't say enough great things about the music Leo is helping to disseminate. I've not listened to a single MoonJune production without saying, wow, that's fantastic music. It's revelation after revelation. So I really suggest that our listeners go to moonjune.com to learn more and to help support the endeavors that Leo is dedicating his life to. Thanks so much, Leo, for being a guest on the Jazz Rocks podcast.
Thank you. And also, since you mentioned MoonJune, I have two free sampler. One is called It Must Be Jazz, which is 25 tunes that are tending to be kind of jazz. And another one is the invitation to MoonJune Records, which is kind of 24 tunes, and you can download for free on my Bandcamp. If you go like to moonjunerecords.bandcamp.com, you might find that information.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
Future Jazz, E. Dr. Smith. Future Jazz, E. Dr. Smith, Peter McGibbon, Laura Austin Wiley. Future Jazz on Edgetone Records, edgetone.com. Future Jazz.
The Jazz Rocks podcast presents The Fusion Files. Tom and Walter reach into their private collections. What will they find?
Walter, it's time to delve into the Fusion Files again, and here we go. This is fun because I always enjoy finding obscure things. And this one really, I wouldn't necessarily say that it appeared on Fusion's greatest hits. You know, on the at the diner on the jukebox.
Right.
It wasn't exactly Fusion's greatest hits, but I'll tell you, there is some great playing on this one, and I had to go literally miles out for it. There you go. I did go miles out for that one. I'll tell you, it's by the great Barry Miles. Barry Miles, the keyboardist, composer.
Yes.
And his brother, Terry Silverlight. And the album's called Barry Miles and Silverlight, which was sort of the name of the band. Great drumming on there, too, from Terry Silverlight, Barry's brother. So Barry's real last name was Silverlight. And I think his middle name was Miles, and he went by Barry Miles. The tune was called The Cat, and man, some right in the middle of that tune, some burning playing, man, between the two of them. Getting the kind of the drums, keyboard, moog kind of thing, and some very percussive, syncopated playing going on, and almost reminded me a little bit of Jan Hammer Group, which would have come along right around the same time, where you got that sort of interaction between Jan Hammer and Tony Smith. It had that kind of feel and that kind of energy. I really love that tune. And before you make your comments on it, I will say that this album in particular falls into a real fun actual event that occurred for me, where hooked up with one of my very best friends and bandmates in Philadelphia, and he said, "Okay, you bring 5 albums, I'll have 5 albums, and we're stuff that we don't have, each other doesn't have.
Yeah.
Let's give it a spin." Well, he brought Barry Miles and Silverlight to the fore, and I was just loving it, man. I got to get this album. I couldn't find it anywhere. I had to actually, get a cassette of it, dubbed down 50 times. But here it is. I finally was able to track it down and get the real deal. Barry Miles. I did find the album eventually and bought it on vinyl at a used record store. Great stuff.
Yeah, it just sort of snuck up on me. It starts off sort of new agey. And of course, I enjoy, good piano. I enjoy anyway, even if it's a little new agey, if it has a little bit of an edge to it, which it was getting. And it kicked in great. And I thought it was a really nice fusion piece. I remember back in the day. What year was this from?
I want to say this was from '75. I have to look. I'd have to go back and actually look at the vinyl version I have of it. I have this on the digital version, but I think it is '75. Yeah,
I remember checking Barry out back then. I had a jazz radio show in college, so I had access to all of the promotional records that were coming into the station. Mm-hmm. And it was great. It was my own personal way to try out music. Of course, I had an affinity for guitar players at the time, so even though I enjoy all instruments pretty much, I would tend to favor the guitar at that time and not pay as much attention to the keyboard players. But I remember he was an up-and-comer. What's he doing now, by the way?
He's done a lot of arrangement for a lot of shows and stuff, and I'm not sure if he's not in Las Vegas, actually. But he did a lot of arrangement for television shows. He actually did a lot of arranging for Mary Tyler Moore, if you can believe that. So, for the show. So the guy is very, very skilled musician, arranger, composer. By the way, I did find the date, and it was 1974, actually, that year again of 74, where I said in a previous program, the year that everything sort of came together, you said it was falling apart, but that's okay.
Well, I'll say, we're gonna make it after all.
There you go.
All right, my tune this week from the Fusion Files is a recognizable tune.
Yeah.
But generally recognizable being played by somebody else. Here it is. Did you recognize that tune, Tom?
I did. It is on one of my originally appeared on one of my all-time favorite albums.
Oh, no kidding.
Oh, yeah. No doubt.
And that would have been?
That would have been an album called Believe It by the great Tony Williams and Tony Williams' Lifetime.
You are correct, sir.
Yes.
But that wasn't Tony Williams and the new Tony Williams' Lifetime this time.
Yeah.
This was wonderful bass player Richie Goods. His album is entitled Live at the Zinc Bar. It's Richie Goods and Nuclear Fusion, and that was Snake Oil, as we discussed already, written by Tony Newton, the bass player for Tony Williams at that time.
Yes.
And in addition to Richie Goods on bass, Helen Sung was on keyboards, Mike Clark on drums, and Jeff Lockhart on guitar. I've met Richie a couple of times, had the pleasure of introducing him at a show. Very nice guy and a great player. I've seen him play I think I saw him play at a festival down in North Carolina. Then I saw him play again at the Regatta Bar up in Boston. I remember reviewing his first album years and years ago, and he introduced himself to me. Great player, and I think a good updated version of that tune. And this was from, I want to say 2010 or thereabouts. I'm going to have to look here on that one because I can't remember.
But not too far back.
No, not too far back. Actually, 2007.
Oh, okay. Right.
Which would have been maybe 2 years before I met him, actually. But I did review this album back in the day, so I've been writing a long time.
Yeah. Yes. Sure. Absolutely. Richie indeed did bring the goods on that one. That was
okay.
That was all right. I like that a lot.
Can we edit that part out later? No, I don't know. We'll see. So that's another edition, and I look forward to our next hunt through the Fusion Files. I think maybe next time I'll see if I can find something you've never heard of before.
You've just heard from the Fusion Files. Do not keep it a secret.
This is Danny Rabin. And this is Danny Markovic. We are Marvin, and you are listening to the Jazz Rocks Podcast. Tom Alexander and Walter Kolosky.
We are back on the Jazz Rocks Podcast. Walter, a fun show, episode number 10.
And I really loved listening to Leo.
Yeah, lots of fun. Very, very just captivating, interesting guy.
The music business has few of those people. He's one of the most impressive music business people I've ever met in my life.
Yeah.
If at some point you get to meet him in person, it's even more impressive. He talks so fast, he sets a record for words per minute, interesting words per minute.
Yeah, it's fun when you hear a person with that much energy and passion.
Yeah, they're very insightful words, and we tend to stay away from politics on the podcast, and I'm going to continue that mode. But one of the things that Leo told me one time when I was getting to know him is we were talking about politics in the United States, and we were talking about the political parties, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and Leo says, I do not belong to the Democratic Party, I do not belong to the Republican Party, I belong to the Leo Party.
You know what? Maybe that's a party we can, let's see if there's some candidates that we can run on the Leo Party.
Well, yeah, I for one am glad he's on the side of great music. That's all that matters to me.
Hey, that's a good party to be part of. That's for sure, no doubt about it. From Miami, I'm Tom Alexander,
and from Boston, I'm Walter Kolosky.
So long, everyone.
This has been the Jazz Rocks Podcast with Tom Alexander and Walter Kolosky. Tom Alexander is a jazz musician and voiceover artist based in Miami, Florida. Walter Kolosky is a music journalist and historian who lives just outside of Boston. The Jazz Rocks Podcast is produced by Alexander Productions. This program was recorded at Studio Alpha in Miami and can be heard on iTunes and Soundcloud. You can follow the Jazz Rocks Podcast on Twitter @JazzRocksPC. and on Facebook at the Jazz Rock Fusion page. If you wish to advertise on the Jazz Rocks Podcast or make any inquiry of Tom or Walter, please email us at info@alexanderproductions.com.